Here we are, Jess. This is hallowed ground.
The Something Who bunker.
Oh, yes, very impressive. And now perhaps you'll explain what all this is about.
Oh, patience, my dear sir, a little longer.
Patience? I'm in the Something Who bunker. You behave as if we're attending a BFI screening.
Let me explain.
Are we attending a BFI screening?
I have always been fascinated by the concept of podcasting.
So that's a no.
Giles here is an expert in certain technical matters.
Everything you see about you here was constructed by us too. And some other chap, but he's not here tonight.
To try and find a way of topping the Apple podcast charts?
Yes.
But the algorithm does not yield easily to our understanding.
Oh, this is Apple we're talking about.
Now, this is my theory. A mirror turns things back to front, does it not?
You British have a strange way of putting things, but I think so.
So, you may be standing at the bottom of the charts and yet appear to be right at the top.
Rich and I first attempted to refine the chart image in the mirror and then to project it.
In here, Jess, are 144 separate mirrors.
Ooh, reflections. Shiny.
And each is of polished metal. Each is subjected to electric charges.
Like repels like in electricity, Jess, and so next, Giles and I attempted to repel the image in the mirrors wherever we direct it.
Ow! What's this I'm standing up? Is this a piece of Lego?
Oh, that was the last experiment. Everything else had failed, so they asked me to join in.
If only we could have known the powers we were going to unleash.
Your attempts to top the chart thus far have always been defeated by other podcasters.
No matter what we do, other shows chart above us.
Perhaps because they have some key factor
Possibly?
that is absent in Something Who.
Possibly?
Perhaps if we found out what it is, we could transplant it into our own podcast.
But if you do that, allied with your own unique format, you'd be invincible.
So now, we have turned to you, Jess.
No, you can't make me do it. You can't expect me to reveal the secret of the Dudley Simpson factor.
Welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed, the basis for the sketch, to make Something Who. Hello, I'm Richard, and we're back with Something Who podcast, episode 91, where this time we're looking at two stories which pose the question of what it means to be a Dalek. We'll look at second Doctor story Evil of the Daleks from season 4, and after that we'll examine 10th Doctor outing Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks from series 3. And I've got a great lineup with me to decide whether these stories open the Daleks' casings to reveal a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma or just an empty void. Starting with science and astronomy writer and Something Who's own Dr. Science, Giles.
Hello, I think I'm going to have to hand back in my BSc and MSc after that sketch.
I hope you've recovered over the last month. Last time we came across you COVID-ridden.
Ah, yes, indeed. Yeah, no, it wasn't too bad. Luckily on this occasion, yeah, fighting fit.
Excellent.
As good as it gets.
Yeah. Okay, and we liked him so much last time, so he's back again. So it's our very own Fraser Hines. Here's Rick.
Well, good evening, everybody. I appear to be stuck in the Something Who bunker.
So
Help.
For anyone who missed our last pair of episodes, Rick posts on social media as Brick Pandorica and makes fantastic Lego models of Doctor Who scenes. And you left our listeners on a cliffhanger last time, so how did your exhibition go of the Lego models?
Yeah, went to the Calder Valley Brick Show, no less, and showed off some of my Lego models to the general public, and it was brilliant. Brilliant to see kids who have a real big knowledge of Doctor Who, not just the recent episodes, but could recognise models from the 60s and 70s. And lovely to pick adults who were doing their best to pretend they didn't know what they were looking at amongst the Doctor Who models. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to the York Racecourse in the middle weekend in April to do the same again.
Wow.
Excellent. You heard it here first.
Fantastic. And finally, and this has been a long time in the making, our guest on this episode is the extraordinary, exuberant jazz pianist, convention enlivener and sometime BFI attendee. It's Jess Jurkovic.
Hello there from the other side of the pond.
Yeah, it's nice to have something of an international flavour. We have been accused occasionally of being four posh Guardian readers who sort of talk over earnestly about Doctor Who. So anyway, I mean, we've got somebody who doesn't sound posh anyway. That's good.
Thank you so much.
I think. Yeah, actually, I don't sound posh, and I don't think any of us really do. But anyway, there we go. So, hello, Jess. Welcome to Something Who.
Thank you.
You're recently back from Gallifrey 1 in Los Angeles. So, how was it?
Brilliant. It's my third time there in a row, I guess I should say, and it's now a sort of addiction. I probably have to go every year because I always have such a good time seeing, old friends and new, and there's such a wonderful mix of guests, splendid guests this year. And for the first time, I actually hosted a panel interviewing 4 composers, including 2 Doctor Who composers, about their work for film and television. I got to interview Sega Nakanola and Dominic Glynn. Ooh. As well as 2 LA-based composers, David Whitaker and George Shaw. It was a fascinating chat, and it was wonderful. It was such an honor to just sit back and listen to them talk.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, I love it when you've got great guests, and you all you have to do is sort of get out of the way, really, or throw a grenade in and then step back and let them get on with the talking.
I'm very glad to say that that's kind of what happened. But I did have to do a lot of listening to a lot of music in preparation for all of that, but I think it was worth it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're really pleased to have you on. As I say, we've been talking about it for a wee while now, and it's great to finally do it.
Well, I'm glad to be able to do it, but I am slightly sorry that I chose possibly the longest combination of episodes ever. I don't know if that's a record for this podcast, but I apologies in advance.
Yeah. I mean, I think unless we were to do the War Games and the sort of Utopia, whatever it is, in Series 3. That's probably, I can only think that will be longer. But anyway, it's great. I mean, well, we'll come in a minute, I think, to the fact that I love Evil of the Daleks. So it's a great choice. So let's start off then by talking about Evil of the Dalek, written by David Whitaker and directed by Derek Martinus. So look, as a sort of opening gambit, I'll say that I first came across Evil of the Daleks as a listing in the Radio Times 10th anniversary special in the sort of mid-70s and also in the making of Doctor Who. There was a DWM archive feature in the early 80s that intrigued me. At the time, Troughton, Watling and Hines all sort of said, yeah, that was our favourite. I was fortunate then to see episode 2 at the Panopticon convention in London, just after it had been recovered in 1987, and I was absolutely transfixed by it. I mean, that I can't think of an episode, maybe Enemy episode 1, but Evil 2, the first time I saw that, I just thought, that's incredible. I mean, it was kind of looking into the past, I suppose. I listened to an audio tape in the early 90s, but that was a bit muffled. It came out on CD, it was a bit better. I've read the Target book, I've watched the animation, and finally for this one, I watched the Telesnap reconstruction from the DVD. I find it hard to be dispassionate about Evil, given I had such a long relationship with it. I've wanted to see it for so long, and there are so many emotions about it. But anyway, I mean, let's open up the discussion, and maybe you can talk, the three of you, about sort of how you came across it.
Well, for me, although I didn't see the original episode until it was released on a VHS tape called Daleks: The Early Years, which I basically wore out. But I did have the Tom Baker narrated audio, which of course excluded the tricolor scenes to get out of the copyright of the recorded music. And then the newer one came out with Fraser Hines narrating. And I adore all of those. And then the recent animation has been just a thrill. And I'm not one of those purists who is mad about the various changes, although we'll talk about some of the music. That's obviously a thing of mine. And so some editing costs some musical cues in the animation, which I was a little sad about, but it's thrilling. All of them are thrilling. And I just really appreciate that story a lot. I have a thing for missing episodes, I guess. And some of those missing stories are favorites, even though they might not be the greatest stories, because of, the memories that I first had when I got to hear them for the first time. They still bring that thrill.
Sure.
Charles?
Well, my first experience was same as Richard. We must have been in the same room
Fantastic.
all those years ago.
Yeah.
Because it was when you said London, because I was thinking, I think wasn't the first recording, it was first screening at Brighton that year before. But I wasn't there for that one, but I was there in 87 at Imperial.
Yeah.
And I was thinking it must have been I was thinking it had to be a convention screening. You helped me to pin down exactly which one it was. Yeah, I've experienced it in kind of all the ways as well, I guess. Yeah, again, thanks Jess for reminding me. It was Tom that did the voiceover on the audio version. I never realised it was cut down. I guess that's the thing, unless you're familiar with the story. Haven't ever read the novelisation, I have to say. That's a gap, but I seem to have consumed it in virtually every other way since.
If you're curious about that old audio cassette that Tom Baker narrated, it is on the Blu-ray as a special feature.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Oh, that's right.
In a way on disc 3.
Very good. I must say, before we go on, I am so envious as an American of the immediacy that you have for Doctor Who fandom, and events seem like they're constantly going on, where we get like 2 a year or 3 a year. I mean, I guess I could travel to a lot of different places that have American Doctor Who conventions, but it seems like there's always something going on, which I just envy a lot.
Yeah, I didn't think it would make a big difference to me, but the curation of Doctor Who material on iPlayer, as it, if I thought an obsession could go up a notch, it has with iPlayer. Turning to Evil this time round, I was just watching it everywhere. I watched it on train, watched it in bed, watched it in the living room. You don't need to know the other place I watched it in.
Okay.
Interestingly, the way that modern streaming services ping you onto the next episode. iPlayer took me episode 1, episode 2 animated, then episode 2 the recovered episode, the original episode, and then into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Because I did notice when I watched episode 2, I watched episode 1, and then I went and watched I went and found the real version of episode 2, and then I noticed it continued straight on. I was thinking I was going to have to find my way back, but it continued on with the animation of episode 3. I was, quite fittingly, I kind of had a multimedia experience of it this time. I was in the car for a few hours yesterday, driving up and down to my mum's, so I did some of the middle episodes on just on audio, and then watched the telesnaps on the old. I managed to unearth the old Doctor Who photo novels website.
Oh yeah.
On the old legacy version of the Doctor Who site, and then picked up again, sort of for the last couple of episodes on animation. So jumped around a bit.
I had the opportunity these last holidays to show my parents the Evil of the Daleks animation. Right. They are Doctor Who fans only to the extent that they will watch it when I'm home. But they do actually like it. They do actually enjoy it. It's a family thing that we end up doing. I guess my dad's into it a little more than my mom, but at the same time, it's a fun thing that we do. And I was impressed because it's a long story, but they were actually quite engaged. And I thought that was a real tribute not only to the story of itself, but the animated production was something that absolutely held their attention and they really enjoyed. So, credit to the show.
Yeah. I mean, one good thing that animation does is it kind of it explains some of the stuff that's very difficult to follow either on the telesnap reconstruction or the audio. Clearly, they may not have got absolutely everything right, or it might not be exactly what happened on screen. But it provides you with more visual information that explains it.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily want to dig too deeply into critiquing the animation, but I found it a very easy watch in terms of the pacing of the story. It wasn't, for a 7-parter, there wasn't a sense that I needed to watch this in chunks to make it through it, which sometimes I do with other 60s Doctor Who. One of the critical things, and I'm sure we'll talk about Camel more broadly over the next hour, but you've literally got a mute character, and audio does that character no favours at all.
Yeah.
All I was going to say was just on Evil, was I had Dalek the early years, loved episode 2, but generally getting Evil of Daleks either on the audio CD or through other means never rose to the top of my pile. It just evaded me. So when the DVD came out, the animated DVD came out, it was brilliant. It was like picking up fresh Doctor Who, and in some respects, watching it over the last couple of weeks, it's still a fresher watch to me than Daleks in Manhattan, Evolution of the Daleks, really. And it was a great excuse to watch it again.
It's funny. It's one of those stories that's had a bit of an up and down in terms of its reputation. And it's always been well thought of, but Power suddenly came from being like, Power was the one that everyone kind of neglected.
Yeah,
it was just like, it's Pat Troughton's first story. We don't know much about it. Whether it was the quality of the audio that circulated at the time, I remember them both being pretty difficult to figure out. I did have a bootleg audio of Power, but Power seems to have soared in reputation maybe since the 90s, and so Evil has been somewhat of an also-ran. But they're trying to do different things. I think it's
somewhere in my mind is that DWB had it as a poll topper for all of Doctor Who in the 90s, and that would have been with very little material available for those voting fans.
Yeah.
And in the most recent poll, the DWM poll, it holds okay amongst the Second Doctor stories, but it's not quite as well regarded as it was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, the big difference for me, I guess, I presume the modern recordings are from Graham Strong, and I think the original ones were Richard Landon or something like that. But I mean, it made a huge difference, that kind of that more modern generation. I mean, obviously dating from exactly the same time, but the clarity, I guess, of the Graham Strong recordings makes it much easier to follow, I think.
Yes.
Oh, it did indeed. Yeah, 1993, 30th anniversary poll, best ever Doctor Who story.
And it was probably about 92 or 93 that cassette came out, I think. From
that
my
sounds
memory.
right.
Yeah. And the Target book would have been around then as well, because it was one of the
It was a late one,
later cleared Dalek books, yeah.
Yes, the John Peel jobs, isn't it? Yeah.
I felt episode 1, it's played a bit like an Agatha Christie play or something like that. It's all about the kind of clues and I mean obviously clues that have been set for the Doctor, but yeah, I mean there were sort of Agatha Christie plays that I remember watching on telly in the 70s that played out in a similar kind of way, sort of trying to piece things together.
Yes. I think about this and about Daleks of Manhattan, in that the reveal of the Dalek is actually really well done, except for the fact it says Dalek in the title, and it would have had pre-publicity.
That's always the problem.
Yeah, so we do see it at the end of episode 1, in fairness. Kennedy discovers the Dalek to his bitter end. But when the Doctor has the Dalek come into the room in Maxwell's lab, there's a beautiful reaction from the Second Doctor to that happening, and it's a lovely reveal into the episode if they played it that way.
Yeah, indeed.
But it's interesting as well. It's such a continuation on from the Faceless Ones.
Yes.
It really feels like it starts mid-story, and it has some, as a 7-part, it has quite defined breaks between stages of the story. So the first 1.5 episodes in contemporary London, bang, it switches wholesale to 100 years earlier and the Maxtable residence, and then midway through episode 6, bang, it's all changed again, and it plays out on Skaro. And I think that pacing helps with what I was describing before, that it actually is quite an easy, continuous watch because it has that defined flow within it.
Yeah. Well, our recent guest, Simon Guerrier, was unable to join us for this one, but his spirit is with us because in his brilliant biography of David Whitaker, he mentions a few things about this particular story. One is that there's a very good reason why it follows on directly from Faceless Ones, and that's because originally Ben and Polly were due to feature in episode 1 and only be written out in episode 2.
Oh.
When that was removed from it, I guess it took away that need, but it had already been written, so I guess it just discontinued going with it.
It's interesting to think what would have happened if Sam Briggs had stuck around as well.
Yes. Well, he says, Simon, that essentially the Molly character, the maid, inherits the dialogue that would have gone to Samantha Briggs. And I guess that kind of makes sense because you've got the scenes with Jamie in the middle part of the story where he's sort of getting quite cosy together. And I suppose that's a bit like what happened in Faceless Ones.
Yeah. You need someone to bounce off while the Doctor is conniving.
Or on holiday, as indeed he was.
Yes, yeah. I was... okay, I'm glad you settled that one because I was listening to those episodes and thinking, this feels very much to me like something where they let let Fraser Hines be the lead for the episode and cut away to a couple of pre-filmed inserts of Troughton on film observing his antics. And okay, oh well, good. That answers that.
So Jess, I mean, I felt when I was watching this that Dudley Simpson explodes into the action straight away. I mean, the first thing that you hear is a lot of music around that kind of those early scenes of the aeroplane and the TARDIS being driven off.
Evil of the Daleks is definitely a turning point in his writing for Doctor Who, because the last few scores, he does 3 scores of season 4, and 2 of them are basically organs with possibly, definitely in one case, him just playing the organ. Suddenly, there's this lush ensemble of flutes and clarinets and English horns and cello and bass and percussion, and then still some radiophonic oscillators for the Dalek music particularly. It's like the first indication of what his eventual mixing of electronica, synthesizers, and acoustic instruments would sound like. And it's so brilliant in that way. And yeah, it gets off to a totally groovy start with that music as they're chasing the TARDIS. But it's so lush, and the documentation of the program as broadcast says that this is the Alec Furman ensemble, or orchestra rather, and there were 8 musicians, but there's more than 8 instruments, and as usual they had someone, each particular musician might double on different instruments. Like the flute would also play alto flute, the clarinet would also play bass clarinet, etc., etc., and the percussionist would usually play multiple things. And significantly, there's separate piano-only tracks, or mostly piano-only, which are very distinctive. And one of the sets of pieces that I transcribed was just this piano music. There's also like a wobbling of the music, so it's been recorded but then treated afterwards to have this kind of wobbling effect that a piano can actually have, and a little bit of oscillator. There's usually like a single tone played at the same time as all this piano music. So it's very strange. And like I say, it's kind of the first steps towards that merging of the 2 instruments into one orchestra, which just makes it fascinating. And I never tire of listening to this music as well.
Yeah, it had never occurred to me previously, but I thought as the Daleks introduced, that the theme around that is not so dissimilar from the Ambassadors of Death. It's that kind of descending pattern of notes. It's not the same notes, but it's kind of, there's a similar kind of pattern to it. I felt.
Certainly for the Dalek music, there is seemingly clear connection to the Doctor Who theme itself.
Right, yes, the diddly dum, diddly dum, diddly
Yes.
dum.
Right.
Yes.
Quite unusual still for the time to have, such a direct reference. I don't know why that was, but composers just did their own thing, and the Doctor Who theme was a totally separate thing from the soundtrack. But this time there's a much more direct connection between the two things.
Actually, the theme I was talking about, I think it's when the secret room's revealed, so maybe it's before the Dalek arrives. Maybe that's when it was.
Yes. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, that one, yes. Yeah.
It's got that, there's some kind of echo, or actually I think it's the vibraphone in the background.
Right.
The vibraphone has that ability it has a little rotator thing underneath which allows the metal sound to kind of vibrate. So it's kind of a wow, 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 wow. And so you hear the clarinet dropping, but you also hear the vibraphone underneath that, and that's actually what's ringing on. So I don't think apart from that it's actually radiophonics, but I could be wrong, just going by ear. But yeah, stuff like that. It's not quite as, I would say, almost mystical as the Ambassadors of Death music comes off to me. And I transcribed that music as well, which is just gorgeous. But yeah, it's much more creepy, I would say, in that,
it's
that
true.
cue.
It's funny what you say about it referencing the actual Doctor Who thing, because I hadn't, until you said it, so I thought, of course it is, because the one that I always think of from the new series that does that is the Sound of Drums.
Certainly.
With that.
The
And I remember trying to describe it, because I was saying, it's like the Doctor Who theme, but all the notes are wrong. And, the sort of with the boom, boom, boom kind of beats in the background. And I was trying to describe it to someone, and they didn't get what I meant at all. But yeah,
yeah. I've also heard that da-da-da-dum theme, specifically to Evil of the Daleks, attributed to the famous piece by Gustav Holst, who wrote The Planets.
It's a bit like the start of Mars.
I think it's much more about Doctor Who, but whenever you want something martial and scary, you bring up Mars, the bringer of war.
Right.
Which Sagan Akinola basically quotes in War of the Sontarans, which I thought was hilarious. But I think it's more a Doctor Who thing than a Mars thing. Yeah. But they are certainly, when it comes to the Daleks, it's understandable that you might make that connection there.
Yeah.
And episode 1 has quite a lot of contemporary music in it as well, which I suppose from a composer point of view, to an extent you have to play off that in terms of your style. And we don't see, I don't think, in the Blu-ray, the original chosen pop songs of the time, do we? I think they've now been replaced for licensing issues.
I thought it was just the Beatles that was replaced.
Right.
I think Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen is in the original.
Right.
I believe that's correct. I actually wanted to ask about that because you were talking about the bootleg recordings. Has anybody heard that scene with the Beatles actually going on, the original? I've never heard it.
Good question. I might have done, but I can't really remember.
Like I said, in the Tom Baker recording, they simply excised the scene.
Right.
Rather than, now, of course, the brilliant Mark Ayres just strips off the music and puts on something else, and I can't believe that's even possible still. Which is how they put that other song, what's it called? Hold Tight is the song that they replaced it with the mouthful band named Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick, and Titch.
Yes.
But there's also that song that they're playing in the shed or the hangar, whatever, where they meet Bob Hall, which is this cute song called Mexican Beat. By Jack Tromby. And Jack Tromby is the author of one of my favorite Monty Python's Flying Circus cues. I don't know if those of us who are listening who know that there's a game show called Blackmail, where they show this awful black and white film of someone doing something that they would rather not be seen, and that's the purpose of the game show. And then it's used in the next episode, and it's now my alarm clock on my phone because I just love it. If you ever get a chance to hear it, it's called Roving Report Number 2. Anyway, off track, but that's the same composer. He obviously wrote a lot of music of that type. Possibly for library cues or songs of their own, but yeah, that's a composer who I've kind of grown to love in a kitschy kind of way.
go back to the plot for a bit. So the whole, I can't quite work out all the stuff that goes on. I mean, it's all very enjoyable, but I can't quite work out what Waterfield's plan is. It seems to be the most insanely complicated plot to get the Doctor and Jamie to his house.
Giles.
So, yeah.
Edward Waterfield has been occupying a massive part of my brain for about a week. I'm utterly fascinated by this character, particularly in those early contemporary London scenes. So on the one hand, he does play it really well in terms of being somebody out of time. There's the slips of the tongue, the guineas instead of pounds, the hansom instead of a taxi or a cab. But then he seems very comfortable in his shop. The shop seems well established. So just how long has this entrapment of the Doctor been going on? Has he been there weeks, months, years? Perry looks very settled in as his kind of second-hand person. He seems familiar with the radio. I know he's shutting the outside noise out of terrible London 1966. But, he's good with the radio. I presume it's him who has selected the Trickler Cafe as the rendezvous point for the Doctor and Jamie. Can you imagine Edward Waterfield walking into that cafe?
Strutting his stuff, yeah.
That's been at least 2 days of my thinking over the last week. Has been, what was that scene like?
Well, I was pondering on the fact that Adam Adamant Lives had started was about a year before this.
Right.
It started. I wonder whether there's a bit of influence of that in there, because obviously there's a somewhat similar. Although, Adamant, obviously.
I've never seen that. That's like a Man Out of Time kind of thing.
Yes, it's the prototype of, it's the thing that Austin Powers is the loving homage of. Basically, it's what Verity Lambert did after she did Doctor Who.
Right.
Yeah, it's really entertaining, and a lot of it's missing, but there's some very good stuff in there. What's his name? Jack, Tim Burrow's favourite actor from the Space Pirates.
Jack May.
Jack May, exactly. Yeah, he plays the butler. He plays the the dour butler. Yeah, Gerald Harper, who's a great and very charming actor, and gets paired off with like a 60s girlie who's not a million miles away from Polly, and the butler, and together they fight crimes of a fairly Avenger-ish nature, really. But anyway, yes, so he gets frozen by his arch villain in the first episode, and then revives in the 1960s, and so that's what what's his name was riffing on, with the idea of frozen in the 60s and brought back in the present day. But so I do wonder whether that's a bit of an influence. And the other thing that was on at this time was the Forsyte Saga.
Yeah,
was airing through that was basically on for about 6 months. Started in January 1967, and so it would have been on at the time. It's maybe a bit too early, but I suppose they'd have known it was happening, because it does have that feel, that Victorian saga-y feel.
Yes, he starts writing it in December, I think. I seem to recall. But yes, obviously that's David Whitaker's wife, who's one of them, leads in that. So there's a direct connection.
Oh, is it? Oh, right, okay. Right, well, in that case, he'd definitely known it was happening.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, I wouldn't have known had it not been for the great efforts of Mr. Guerrier.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah. Okay.
It's lovely window dressing, and Giles is great context for some of the programmes on the time. The Antique Shop, great window dressing, but ultimately it's the theft of the TARDIS.
Yes.
Is the bait, not the anachronistic antique shop. So they've kind of simply got the Doctor and Jamie by pinching the TARDIS and driving it to a location. But I love the theatre that gets Jamie and the Doctor into the time.
I'm still trying to work out. Yeah, I'm trying to work out. So hang on, does Bob Hall deliberately act suspiciously in order to?
Kinda.
Yeah, he gives them the name of Leatherman.
Yes.
And so he's it seems like it's all an act. First to deny nothing, I'm just doing my job, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then he offers that when the doctor threatens to go to the police. It seems like that was basically part of the plan.
Yeah, drops the matches as well.
Yeah.
Quite.
Yes.
But I guess as you're saying this, Rick, I'm thinking, on the one hand, the antique shop is a brilliant ruse, sort of selling items that are contemporary in Victorian London, bringing to the future and selling them. But to what end? I mean, how's it going to? What's he using that money for? Because there doesn't seem to be. Well, I mean, he couldn't spend the money back in Victorian London. It would be a different currency or different notes. So, but is he buying stuff and then taking it back? It's just not really very clear.
To conclude the threat on the absurdly overcomplicated plot, it does slightly beg the question of why he didn't just have the TARDIS kidnapped in a van that said Waterfield's Antiques. Cut out all the middlemen. It's only just occurred to me. And again, this is something that was, I guess, a result of research renders it somewhat impossible, because we know that this was basically, I believe, commissioned from Whitaker as a Dalek script from the outset. That when Terry Nation, I think they wanted did they want Terry Nation to write it, and then he.
I believe what's happening here is it's well known that he's withdrawing the rights.
Yes, yeah.
So they know they've got one last go at it. Terry Nation
Right.
doesn't want to do it, but he's prepared to let David Whitaker do it, I think.
Yeah, because he tried to sell the Space Security Service thing to the BBC, and then when they didn't buy it, he said, "Right, well, I'm taking the whole thing to America." But I remember reading a thing I think it was in the Frame back in whenever that was, late 80s or so. But the first very glossy fanzine of the period, well researched. House Stammers Walker, those kind of people. But I do remember reading an essay, speculating on the whole story. The whole story and what Waterfield is up to is so weird in the context. There seem to be so many loose ends of stuff that isn't explained. That is this a case of the Daleks have been bolted onto a pre-existing different story, where possibly I think the speculation they call. I think that the essay was called something like Daleks through the Looking Glass, and they were speculating that Waterfield was trying to get back to get his wife, somehow go through time and reach his dead wife, or something like that, and that was why he was doing all the antique stuff, was somehow financing his experiments.
What I do know is that there's an earlier version of this story that exists, which involves them going back to the cavemen, and
yes.
So rather
Right.
than there being the Turk, Jamie's battling the caveman, I think, or something like, or is it the caveman who's getting the human factor? Anyway, one way or another,
they wanted the human factor from the caveman.
That's right. Yes.
Right. Goodness.
It also raises the question, given that so much of this is David Whitaker being, and they always say Hartnell's the first Doctor Who fan, but I think this shows strong evidence that David Whitaker is possibly the first hardcore Doctor Who fan. And you do wonder whether he'd have gone back to the tribe of Gum and kidnapped whichever one it was that survived. I can never remember.
Well, he's the last one around who would remember that, I guess. Everyone else has moved on by now, I suppose, from the original team.
But obviously, because when we get to Skaro, we got all the stuff that is Terry Nation would never have remembered. I don't think would never have had that cunning idea of, of course the Doctor can find his way into the Dalek City because he's been there. And,
Well, he might have. He certainly remembered a lot of his ideas in the Pertwee.
there is that.
I wonder whether this caveman idea as well is a hangover of one of the lines on Skaro where the Emperor says, "Doctor, you're going to use your TARDIS to spread the Dalek factor throughout the entire history of humanity. It's not enough just to infect humanity. It's got to be from the very start to the very end." And perhaps there was a story at some point that had a lot of grander scale in terms of humanity's history. But getting back to Waterfield, because I've been thinking about him a lot, he goes from this quite authoritarian Victorian gentleman in contemporary 1966 to the point really starting with the death of Kennedy, but certainly going back to 1866, where he pretty much falls apart almost instantly. And I was also left thinking, what happened to the confident Edward Waterfield in control of his circumstances that we saw in those opening 2 episodes? There he's suddenly in somebody else's house with, curiously, a picture of his dead wife on the sitting room of somebody else's house. And
speaking of plot convenience, Playhouse.
He just slowly slips away.
Although he does have that scene in episode 1 where he's talking to the Dalek that we don't see on screen, basically, of I've done everything that you've asked me. Let me go. You know, he's basically he's falling apart there, and he kind of does. Or is that in episode 2? Oh, anyway, well, forgotten.
Whichever episode it's in, it's a good challenge.
I think it's episode 1, but yeah.
I'm trying to remember, because actually there's a shot of him getting up. He's kind of slumped down along his chair, and then he gets up. He goes out and sees that the bell ringer has gone off. And that must be episode 2, because obviously I can see that. So in my mind.
My final bit of overthinking on this topic is I am wondering what happened to the shop.
Perry probably took it over. I mean, that would be his opportunity. He seems like a go-getting kind of chap. So
he became Acorn Antiques.
The complication of the plot is there are little kernels of sort of pleasure that you can follow along with it, but at the same time, it ends up being a bit too clever. If you're really being critical about it.
I'm not.
I love it. You know, I love it, but it was also, to be purely practical, a 7-episode story that had to be filled out. And so, again, it was quite logical and works reasonably well to have it split into those various elements. The 1966, the 1866, the Scarrow. That just about does it. I mean, for me, I think maybe episodes 3 and 4 could be smashed into one episode, perhaps. There's a lot of great music, but we don't need 5 minutes of Jamie fighting in episode 4. It's probably terribly exciting if we ever saw it, however. But this would be, as Terrence Dix might say, a cracking 6-parter. And there aren't that many cracking 6-parters. It's pretty good as a 7-parter, which, as I say, is much in its favor. But it's always a little too clever by half for me.
But I share your love for the contemporary scenes.
Oh yes,
and the sheer
I wouldn't want to lose
the
them.
plot.
It's
no, for sure.
It's just an amusing observation.
Well, it just really presents such a great contrast, because not the contemporary music, the total scene change, the change in the language and the behavior, the change in Simpson's music. At that point, it suddenly becomes like the piano music I describe as slightly demented Chopin. You know, it's sort of contemporary almost, or it would be it attempts to be of the period, even though there's some wrong, sinister notes in it, but it's still kind of creepily beautiful. But that contrast I think is neatly handled there.
I think we're lucky to have episode 2 as the only representative, because it's sort of got elements of the whole. I mean, the only bit it doesn't have, I guess, is Scarrow, but everything else that's going to be in the story and pretty much all of the characters are in that episode. So it gives us a good view, I suppose, of the contemporary part, the Victorian part. Nice.
I totally agree, and I don't for 1 minute suggest that making that animated show was easy. But having those reference points in episode 2 gives me, as a viewer, really good reference points for almost every location, almost every character. I think it's just Kemble and Terrell that are missing for that. And even the Scarrow scenes, Richard, we've got all that test footage for the final battle that gives us a really good view of Chris Thompson's design for the final battle.
Right, and the fact that the location, Grimstag Manor, still exists,
Yes.
they could actually go there. I think they may have someone had gone there for one of the recreations, because there's like live action of
Yes.
a stand-in Victoria walking through,
Yes.
etc. And so that's certainly a boon to those elements that needed referring and recreating.
However, I would like the other episodes back, please.
Yes. Yes.
And I'd like them now.
Well, if any of our listeners are in the kind of Wigan area, then perhaps they can pass that message on. So, yeah, I mean, I guess also thinking about that episode too. I mean, I love the sort of juxtaposition of Victoria. I mean, Victoria is introduced with a very soft woodwind music. You were talking about it earlier, Jess, and then you've got the harsh Dalek coming in. I mean, the Dalek voices in this are really kind of top notch. Yes. Dalek voices are very kind of variable across, particularly in the 60s, but these ones are the sort of ones that I imagined the Daleks always sounded like, even if they didn't.
Yeah, they got the ring modulator just right there. It's just that perfect amount of harsh and inhuman and not squeaky.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's also a Dalek episode where the Daleks say very un-Dalek-like things. And the forefront of which is them chanting Dizzy.
Yes.
In a way that Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer would be proud of. and they sound absolutely like you would expect Daleks at play to sound. It's again, that's one of those scenes which I dearly love to be recovered.
For certain, it's completely iconic, and the brilliant choice of casting Roy Skelton as primarily the child Daleks' voices, or the humanized Daleks, really sells it, because it just totally contrasts. Although Peter Hawkins is one of the child Daleks,
right?
But yeah, that whole thing is just amazing, and it's one of those moments I think that everyone would remember seeing. It's just so out of the blue and seems so significant to what's going to happen, and indeed it is.
Yeah,
we don't get that Victoria theme again in the run of the show, do we? It's just Evil the Daleks, the sort of woodwind ensemble. Is that right?
Well, may you ask? This is actually the first recurring theme in Doctor Who's history. Victoria has music that basically is attached to her by episode 3, when they're moving her through the house. And we get it a couple of other times, one in episode 4 and episode 6. And then it recurs in each one of the season 5 Simpson stories that he does. It's in the Ice Warriors, and it's in Fury from the Deep. Not that much. Like it's in the scene where Victoria's having to talk to Varga in the storeroom in episode 2 of Ice Warriors, and then it's the very end of Fury from the Deep as she's saying goodbye.
Right.
So, but he gets it in there, and by the time we're in Murray Goldland, there's recurring themes all the time, and that's the way that music is now created for television, as well as certainly film, but certainly television now as well, and that was not possible because composers didn't recur as often until Dudley Simpson started sticking around and getting more than one gig in a year. So he was able to direct that kind of continuity in the show like no other composer could at the time. Yeah.
I really loved Troughton's performance in episode 2. I mean, it's hard to judge in the other episodes, but certainly, you've got the comic duo with Jamie going round the antique shop, and then contrast that with much later in the episode where he suddenly realises what he's up against and the sort of absolute earnest. So I think you have some sense of what we've lost in the other episodes when you see that.
Yeah, the reaction to that mention of static electricity and things.
That whole exchange really with Terrell as well, where he's trying to get him to drink.
Yes.
And I think that's really well played by Troughton. I'd love to see that scene again on video. I think, though, he's helped by the script. This almost, for me, is my favourite sort of Second Doctor way of approaching a situation where he's quite passive. He bumbles along with the direction of travel without really doing much more than influencing here or there. He kind of just goes with the flow in terms of helping Maxtable and helping the Daleks with their test of Jamie. And it's only really late on where he starts to engage in this, have I guessed one move ahead of the Emperor to a conclusion. And it's quite clever, that. And for Troughton, in terms of the audio, he plays that really well. So well that I can genuinely believe Jamie turning on the Doctor later on and saying, this is us done here. You're not playing the hero here, where really what the Second Doctor is doing is what I associate with the Second Doctor, which is he's waiting till that last possible moment when he knows that his intervention is going to count and be victorious. And absolutely archetypal Second Doctor for me.
At the same time, he is quite manipulative in a way that we don't always see. To get Jamie into the gauntlet, he has to, basically hint at him, don't go rescue Victoria. And so that part is interesting. I mean, we don't, and as you say, we don't see that kind of reaction to the Doctor's behavior, probably not since, I don't know, the massacre or something, where it suddenly seemed like the Doctor has gone too far and is too inhuman and callous. And that's a very interesting plot point and character moment there, although I don't know how exceedingly strong it is, but it certainly ramps up the tension in that part of the story.
But I agree with you, Jess, that this is about influencing suggestion and manipulation. It's not, as we see the Doctor in other incarnations say, I'm taking charge here. You are going to listen to me. The Second Doctor tends to play it as the follower, just nudging things, patting things into place until bang, he knows what the moment is that he needs to intervene, and he plays it, in my mind, really well in this story.
But yes, this is the only one where he pushes it as far as to cast doubt in the minds of the companions.
Aliens.
Because although we see him in various other things, like Tomb and so on, yes, he's being manipulative, but we don't have any. He's manipulating people into doing things and so on. But it's the companions, because they're our identification figures, and they always trust him. But that's another bit that I certainly love to see the real thing.
There's a slightly kind of Middle East sort of music theme when Kemmel comes on the scene, but I've written here, I can't quite remember it now, but I said the brass and woodwind could almost be a Star Trek tune as well from the 1960s. It's a nice piece of music, but I thought it's kind of quite typical maybe of some of those sort of action stories from that era.
Are you talking about the fight scene music or
stuff
from earlier?
I think it is the fight scene, probably. Yes.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. I mean, there's certainly that sound associated with it's not the oboe, it's the English horn. It's a little bit of a deeper sound, but that kind of reedy instrument you can easily associate with say the Middle East or Turkey, where Kemmel's from.
Yes,
but I didn't actually notice a direct connection there, but you could certainly see that and make that connection.
Yeah, okay.
Rick, you brought up Arthur Terrell, and I actually find his character like a tiny bit disappointing, only in that I don't think we get enough opportunity to realize why he's been put under control and what the payoff for that is. Like, you only get a sense of it at the end, that clearly he found out what's going on and is tortured by it, and they need to, this is my thinking only, they needed to quiet him down and make him a team player, if you will. But it's just sort of a mystery that he is controlled like that, and we get a few scenes of him having to hold his head and hear the throbbing obey sound. I would have liked a little something more, perhaps even a scene where we first meet him, where he is that tortured person. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly he's a new man, a new, calmer man. Mm-hmm. That might have been much more compelling when we kind of know why that's happening, instead of it just being a mystery that sort of unwraps itself and then they all run away.
Yeah. It's a bit... It feels a bit contradictory. I was getting mixed messages. I mean, I guess it's made fairly explicit. Ironically, after they've exited stage left, I think the Doctor has a line with Maxtable about the control unit or whatever that sort of wraps it up in episode 6 or 7. But it's a bit funny because when we hear the obey sounds like Dalek voice, so you think, and then are we meant to? I don't know. Because are we then meant to assume it is the Daleks that have done that to him? Because then we've got Maxtable himself.
Yes,
is clearly a bit of a master hypnotist.
I think it is. Isn't it meant to be Maxtable's voice? I'm not sure about that.
Maybe it's very.
I don't think so. It sounds more like the Emperor, actually, because it's got an extra echo on it.
Okay, maybe
that's all. Well, that's
yeah.
Okay,
I assumed it was Dalek-y.
I was left thinking who's in whose heads.
Yeah.
I think Giles and Jesse touch on things. Who is in Terrell's mind? I've kind of led towards that's being a Dalek influence because the whole magnetism and electrical stuff that's going on. But we do see Maxtable hypnotise the maid at some point in that. But then equally...
And he apparently
I kind of get a hint that
Victoria, by the looks of it, at some point.
Yes, that's right.
I kind of think that the Daleks are in Maxtable's mind.
Yes.
As well in all of this. I'm not sure that Maxtable is entirely in control of his thoughts and his direction of travel over these episodes, and perhaps that's me.
Although he's got
adding things to the plot.
Mm-hmm. He's got a motivation as a human. It's this sort of mad alchemy dream, but that's sort of that seems to give him enough. Yeah, it gets a bit tangled up.
There's that moment where Terrell stops Maxtable from murdering Waterfield.
Yes.
He's about to sort of shoot him. Yeah.
I mean, maybe being able to see the video for ourselves, we would see something in the portrayal. It's one of those big hopes that I would have.
For sure. I always felt like Maxtable was kind of in charge of his own destiny because he'd already, as we find out, gone to the dark side, and his ambition, kind of like we see with the character of Diagoras in Daleks in Manhattan. He's got an ambition which the Daleks will take advantage of, so he doesn't need control in that way,
right?
And so he's interesting in that way because he's also kind of more scheming, but he has they have that conversation. He has that conversation with the Daleks, I just think we're colleagues. We're peers. I'm helping you, you're helping me, and why should you have to force me to do anything?
Yeah. And
even when they do, try to, put him down, physically, that happens in that scene. He talks himself out of it, and I must not be frightened, he says. And so I feel like Terrell is the wild one in that equation. The others can be controlled, either by hypnotism or like daughter Ruth, she's just kind of oblivious of it. And, from there, drama ensues.
I guess before we move towards the Scarrow elements, I'm going to sigh deeply about Kemmel as a characterisation. I mean, we come across it in classic Doctor Who a lot. We can excuse it as being the way television was made at the time and the social norms of the time, but it's a pretty rotten role from what we can tell through telesnaps and audio. His very introduction as being simple, dumb, with an undeveloped mind, the stereotypical clothing, the fact that he's mute, and has just an awful end of life in terms of it was a really unnecessary death. It was like,
it's horrific.
We've got to kill this
really
character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maxtable suddenly U-turns, seeks him out, kills him off.
Yes.
Some of me hopes that if we had the video, there would be something in the portrayal of Kemmel that retrieved the situation. But it's one of those things, as a Doctor Who fan, it's just difficult to play along with.
Yeah, agreed. I actually had occasion to look up the word dumb, which is what Maxtable uses. And it does specify that a definition of dumb is unable to speak.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So we might take it as saying that he is not a smart person. In many ways, he comes across, of course, as heroic and noble. Unfortunately, probably a noble savage, but he does come off as noble.
Yeah.
Not that it justifies anything, but I did find it interesting that I think Whitaker chose to use that word dumb in a very Victorian way.
It would have been. I think deaf mute is something that's come in much more recently as being because of the double meaning. But I think for someone of I'd certainly in my childhood, deaf and dumb was the accepted usage, and dumb meaning speechless, and not having not necessarily having. I'm not arguing that certainly Kemmel is that sort of archetypal, as you say. There's a bit of noble savage thing. There's certainly Maxtable doesn't think he's the sharpest tool, and the way that things have to be acted out, and the way he spells out things apparently spells out stuff. Although we don't see it on, we don't have the real thing, but the way he apparently has to spell things out very clearly. Yeah, he's very unfortunate, but I think in terms of the usage of the word dumb, it would have been in the mute sense.
To your point, Richard, I think a caveman out of time would have been a more palatable
Perhaps so. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the one thing we can say is that West Indian actor Sonny Caldinez actually gets a chance to get his face on screen. He's in a number of other episodes, but always in a rubber suit.
Yeah,
and he did seem to be, when he was interviewed, sort of moderately proud of the role. So I would agree with you. It's not great from a modern perspective, but I guess it's employment as far as he's concerned.
5 episodes worth, not bad.
Yeah.
It's
a shame we don't have any of them to really judge it by.
I guess. I mean, we do need, I guess, to get to Oscar. The one thing I wanted to say is it's a very curious end to episode 5. The cliffhanger to episode 5 is the Daleks are behaving strangely. On the other hand, why wouldn't you want to come back next week to see what's going to happen next?
Yeah, I agree.
Is that? I'm not sure. Has Maxtable? I'm trying to think where Maxtable is before that, because he gets the last line in the episode, and I'm not sure whether has he just snuck into the room. So is the? I honestly can't remember whether that's...
Yeah, he comes in at some point while the Doctor and Jamie are talking.
Yeah.
To sort of point. He shows them the Daleks in the cases where they're dormant, but then he comes in at some point to sort of announce that they've been.
So I'm wondering whether the cliffhanger is actually Maxtable's crept up behind them while they've been doing this, rather than...
Yeah, so I think that scene, which is in Maxtable's lab, starts with the Doctor showing Jamie the new Daleks. They've got the human factor in them. It's where Jamie has that, "You've gone too far, Doctor, that's us, we're done." And it's halfway through that scene that Maxtable enters, inspects the Daleks playing away, and that leads to ultimately the cliffhanger. And as you say, Maxtable gets that final line about, "It's an amusing little game, isn't it, Jamie?" or something to that effect.
Yeah.
But imagine in modern times, I think that would have been the cliffhanger that would have lit social media alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
What have you done to the Daleks?
Bring them back. Bring them back.
Yep.
One more thought on the whole hypnotism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just briefly, I was interesting because Maxwell is obviously a practitioner of all of that. It's funny. It's almost funny that because considering we're going on to review something else, half of which is called Evolution of the Daleks. Given the time setting and everything like this, and the themes that are running through this, it's almost funny that Maxwell doesn't make any references to Darwinian.
Yeah.
To Darwin and evolution and stuff like that. But what he does do, because he's a hypnotist, and I was thinking, of course, hypnotism at that time being mesmerism, and there was. I wonder whether Whitaker's taking the idea of animal magnetism almost literally, because that was, magnetism was another terminology used for hypnotism and mesmerism at the time. So I'm wondering whether the fact that tells apparently magnetic powers or whatever. It's very odd. Just can't quite work out where it's going with all of that stuff. And obviously we get the James Clerk Maxwell references earlier as well.
I mean, the problem is that the junction of Whitaker and Nation always results in interesting science, doesn't it?
Yes,
some of it is plausible and some of it is less so. But then I suppose, we say that now. I mean, who knows what we'll be saying in 100 years' time? But it does feel like it's. I mean, there's later on. There's even that kind of weird thing where they say, "Oh yes, we're going to turn human thought into steam or whatever, and distribute it that way." It's very fairy tale, I suppose, rather than the hard science.
Well, it's almost like even on Skaro, there's still like a 19th century conception of science.
Yes,
whether it's the Daleks' thought patterns on silver wire or this idea of a steam. It just seems like even if Maxwell wasn't Dalekized at that point, he'd have bought that. It would have made sense to his scientific mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, the episode begins with the development of time travel in Victorian times by the elaborate placement of 144 mirrors. So there's all sorts of fabulous pseudo-scientific ideas clattering around this episode, and again, it just simply adds to its charm for me.
Oh, for sure.
So we move across to Skaro and the Emperor Dalek, when we get that kind of that beat again, the diddly-dum beat, as the Emperor is introduced. Plus Fraser Hines with his sort of typical, "Oh, look at the size of that thing, Doctor." In the cell, Troughton gets out the recorder again and plays it quite extensively. I mean, I know we do see the recorder again later in this era, but I can't remember him playing it, other than a sort of few discordant notes here and there, all that much after this point.
Abominable Snowman.
Right.
Pretty sure that's it, if I remember rightly. It sort of fades away from there. But it's sort of nicely plaintive because it keeps the scene going without anything actually having to happen. It's surprisingly effective, I find. Because obviously he's puzzling out a problem, as he says.
And we actually get the alchemy, the transmutation happening. So you sort of think that Maxwell is going to be strung along, and then suddenly he's actually got what he was looking for. Although he loses himself in getting it.
Yes.
Again, Maxwell is curious, isn't it? He's strung along with the idea that this alchemy secret is going to be passed to him. It's clear, because we know the Daleks, that he's not going to get it.
Yeah.
He's going to be betrayed. So it's curious that it's shown to him at all.
Yes.
Actually,
Because, what's in it for the Daleks to show that they can actually...
Yes, I was surprised when that cropped up. I thought, oh, okay, didn't remember that.
It just sort of struck me that they didn't actually needed to do it. Like, it could have just been a device that goes ping. Because by the time he never actually gets to use it. I mean, the animation goes so far as to turn the substance gold inside the container or whatever. But it is curious that they go that far to actually tempt him.
And then what's Maxwell's business model? He's suddenly able to turn a basic metal into gold. But what's that going to be useful for? Because he also knows that by helping the Daleks obtain this factor, the Daleks become the dominant race on Earth. So who's there to buy gold rings, gold-plated cups, and
it's the
gold everything else?
underpants known business model, isn't it?
Yeah.
Steal
What's he
underpants. Profit.
Right. Question mark in the middle.
Yes.
This reminded me a bit, to a much lesser extent, but of the Professor Zaroff model of scientist, who's in it only for the achievement. I have always hated that. And maybe this is just my naivete, but by and large, it's not the scientists who are out to get us. But at that time, I'm sure that it may have felt that way because of some of the effects of World War II and the atomic bomb and so on, that science was turned against us, was turned against humanity. Certainly Terry Nation thought that, or at least that affected some of his thought process, I imagine. But I always kind of am a little sad when it's just about the scientist who's gone bad because they wanted... I mean, in this case, he did actually want riches, whereas Zaroff was just blowing up the world to blow up the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? So that no one would ever know afterwards that he had done it, but at least he would know it as he was engulfed in flames. So I always... It bristles against me when I see scientific characters like that. Not that scientists are always, angels, but there's science fiction of this time sometimes has an obsession with the scientist gone bad. And that has always fallen flat to me. I think Maxtable's a more compelling character, and it's more a human failing than just, a mustache twirling enemy. Yeah, that sometimes makes me a little...
Yeah. I mean, I guess Maxtable is sort of an industrialist, maybe, Victorian. I mean, he's the guy. He's the guy with the money. He's the guy. I mean, he understands enough of the science to know that it's a secret that he wants. But I guess Waterfield is more of the heavy lifter in the relationship in terms of actually making the science work, perhaps. But then that begs the question of why he wants to shoot Waterfield at some point, because as soon as he's done that, he's lost his science guy.
Golden goose.
I think by then, though, Waterfield has entered into the disposable category because he has the cabinet of mirrors.
Yeah.
He has the Daleks about to honour their deal and give him alchemy, which is, again, why I flippantly refer to a business model. I think he is, Richard, as you say, more the industrialist maybe than the pure scientist. But it then brings me into the question, and I'm sure we'll want to reflect on it when we talk about Daleks in Manhattan. The Daleks want the Doctor for the Doctor and the TARDIS, and the Doctor's ability to isolate the human factor.
Yeah.
But actually, they have this plan for Jamie. It's the Daleks who choose Jamie to be the representative of humanity to provide that human factor, not Maxtable or Waterfield or Terrell or take your pick out of that long list of characters that are already inhabiting that house. So are they picking Jamie because Jamie represents all that we believe we want humanity to be as Doctor Who fans? He is the identifiable companion character, a wonderfully innocent character in many respects, pure of courage and bravery and loyalty to the Doctor. Or are they picking Jamie because this is a double bluff of the Emperor, which is it's exactly those characteristics they want to eliminate from humankind to make humankind more Dalek. But then when we get to Daleks in Manhattan, their choice of quote-unquote human factor is very different, and they have very different motives for picking Diagoras at that point. So Jamie has quite a special role in this, but it's interesting that plot-wise they pass on other characters that could potentially provide that functionality.
It's lucky they haven't chosen Ben, I think is what I'm thinking, because while he's forming his plan, the Doctor has two male companions, but yes, one of them disappears just at the last minute.
Yes, I mean, whether it's just I suppose it's a knock-on effect of they need to, but they do a lot of kidnapping, don't they? Because they want the TARDIS, and we then find out they've got an ulterior motive for wanting the TARDIS. But they're holding Victoria hostage, they're holding the TARDIS hostage, both ostensibly to get other people to do what they want, really. I don't know. I know that was one thing that I sort of thought throughout. Episode 4 is most of the sort of challenge. Yeah, like the getting through the house stuff, isn't it? Yeah, and then the Doctor's got a running commentary on Jamie showing these various, worthy attributes of humanity. I think it's a shame that doesn't really show up. I don't know when the Daleks get get the human factor, they just go a bit silly, really. I mean, it's quite nice, and they sort of and the why thing is quite good, but then it doesn't really reflect what Jamie's done in the house or anything like that. We don't get to see them like showing compassion, particularly for each other, or any of these other attributes that he's shown off. Or equally, it's not like Jamie has particularly questioned, like if Jamie was a bit more why, because he's obviously we see him arguing all that with arguing with the Doctor quite a bit, but he doesn't really say, well, why are you doing this as such? And that could be reflected the other way if you wanted the Daleks to be asking why.
I think that is the turning point, though, Giles. I think you are putting your finger on it, that conversation between Jamie and the Doctor, where somebody who he has been unequivocally loyal to up until now, you suddenly think, well, why, Doctor, have you been behaving like this? I'm not standing for this. I've got better standards than you're displaying, and I'm going to challenge that. So when we get to episode 7, where those Daleks who have the human factor in them start saying, well, you don't have my unconditional loyalty, Emperor. We want to know why, and we are going to resist if we do not believe that we can see the honour and the...
Maybe it is there. Maybe it just,
and then, cue civil war.
One thing that I think the animation does beautifully is actually portray some of what you're talking about, Giles, because the first time a black Dalek destroys a human Dalek in the animation, of course, who knows what happened in the real episode 7, but in the animation, the one Dalek gets killed and the other Dalekites, pushes at it to see if it's still alive. I actually am really moved by that. I thought that was a beautiful touch because suddenly it's like, I sympathize with these Daleks. It's incredible because this was like, my friend. It was, I thought that was beautiful. I hope something like that happens in episode 7. That's probably too much to ask. But I thought that was a beautiful touch to bring that point home that change had happened. Sure, most of the time we see them as kind of kids. By the time, they're in episode 7, we start to get a little bit more. Yeah. I mean, they still sound a little bit like kids because of Roy Skelton's portrayal, but I think that there is a change that I hope is made there. At least the animation tries to bring that across. Yeah.
I mean, it feels to me a little bit like episode 7 is chaotic. I mean, I hope that if we ever get to see it, that it'll turn out to be better than I imagine. I just get this sense, I suppose, that there's a mixture of the visuals. There's the model shots. There's the actual shots in the set look pretty good from what we can see. But there's a lot that goes on in a fairly short period of time, like a lot of 60s Doctor Who final episodes. Well, I mean the death of Kemmel and Waterfield perhaps aside, which are a bit unnecessary, it nonetheless I think it does have a nice way of finishing the story. But I wonder how it was realised.
Really, the death of Kemmel and Waterfield is it serves the purpose of releasing Victoria into the care of the Doctor, and doesn't add much else really to that. In terms of the Emperor itself, what a design!
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
easily one of the iconic pictures that you'd get I'm sure it was in the Doctor Who Book of Monsters, that would occasionally appear in DWM. It absolutely seared in your mind, and that the kind of the framework, climbing frame type framework of the throne room as well, just fantastically inventive and absolutely burns an image in your mind. So I think just again a wonderful job by Chris Thompson, who comes across really well on the extras on the Blu-ray. The Emperor itself, in terms of how it behaves, is again interesting to me. How the character of the Emperor starts to fall apart. For me, the Emperor starts as someone who has absolutely outthought the Doctor. So he's captured the Doctor. It captured the Doctor, got the Doctor to collaborate with identifying the human factor. Doesn't actually want the human factor, so gets one over the Doctor by creating the Dalek factor. So there can be ultra Daleks, absolutely pure Daleks, and then realises that the Doctor's played the Emperor Dalek because he's found a way to actually infect the Daleks with the human factor, cue Civil War. And the Emperor Dalek falls apart magnificently, blows up in a wonderful way. And when there's all the fighting in the room, comes out with the line, "Do not fight here." And that's what my grandpa used to do when me and my brother were going at it in his living room. It wasn't that he wanted us to stop fighting; he just didn't want us to be doing it there. And so, as a parent grandparent substitute, I thought that was a wonderful moment.
Yeah.
I was always curious about the actual presentation of the Emperor in the story, because of course the animation takes the trouble to make the eye move and the lights flash. But I had always read, probably from like the Peter Haining books, that the Emperor Dalek was immobile and didn't move at all. It was just this giant controlling brain in a ultra-sized Dalek casing. And I honestly wonder if it really did just sit there. Maybe they would have tried to do something with it, at least flash a light. But I'm curious about that, because I had the impression that the animation moved beyond that idea and tried to give it a little bit more visual idea, which would make sense they would do in the original TV too.
Well, it's Derek Martin that's directing all of this, so again, you'd imagine he'd try and do stuff, because he was no slouch. I mean, when we got the episode of Galaxy 4, when we got Airlock back, that had nice surprises that,
Indeed,
lifted what we thought was a fairly static, had always assumed was a fairly static staging.
And I will say, for Skaro generally, and speaking of Derek Martinez, the lighting of the interiors of the Dalek city are beautiful and scary. It's seemingly a rare occasion where they underlit it, and it's scary as hell for me. Like you see Daleks creeping out of shadows, and obviously the lights come up on the Emperor in this vast dark chamber of him. And eventually, like those things really stand out to me. Is that it's not a bright gleaming Dalek city. It's dark and scary, and you don't know what's around the next corner. Even though the lattice work walls, you can clearly see through, it's still, that was a design. Obviously they weren't like out of money or anything, I don't think, but it's a clever design and really beautifully lit, I think.
Yeah.
So imagine a parallel universe where that's it. Terry Nation gets his Dalek American TV series off the ground, or just those licensing discussions never quite see eye to eye. Is this a good fitting finale for the Daleks in Doctor Who? Is it the epic finish that befits the Doctor Who's greatest enemy?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the only thing I would regret, if this was the final Dalek story in the original run, the only thing I would regret probably is Genesis missing. It feels like after this, when they come back, I mean, Day of the Daleks I love as a story, but it doesn't feel like the Daleks have a big part to play in it.
No.
Yeah, I like some of the other Dalek stories too, but this does feel kind of, yeah, it's a big story in a way that maybe a lot of the other ones aren't. It's played with very high stakes, and it feels like it achieves them by and large.
I would say, apart from maybe limitations of scale, we're certainly spoiled in the new series for numbers of Daleks, vastness of armies and fleets. I think it really is exciting and seems final. And if for no other reason that the Doctor says it's the final end, and we believe the Doctor, I would be okay with that. I think that would be pretty exciting. Although Dalek's Master Plan arguably has a more epic ending, I think that this is a great one just for the breadth of the story that we've gone through. I think is a really great payoff here.
Yeah, and it's Daleks behaving as Daleks. They're cunning. They've got a plan. It doesn't work out, but they've got a clever plan. Yeah, I like that.
A cunning plan, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it gets a bit more. It's got that dramatic heft because it's seated in. I was just going back and checking. It's episode 5. The Doctor has that discussion with Waterfield about the Dalek factor, and Waterfield thinks he's talking about, sacrificing the future of the Earth, and like wiping out, sacrifice the whole world, a history, past, present, and future, destroying an entire race. And Doctor says, yes, I don't think you quite realise what you're saying, but yes, it may come to that. It may very well come to that. And so that sort of seeds the fact that these are the stakes here. So I think, apart from, I guess we might look at the effects, the 60s effects, with a certain level of jaundice, if it was there, especially if it was there to actually see, as well as being the last ever Dalek story, then we might have our doubts about that. But I think dramatically it's a good finish. But then again, it's a difficult hypothetical, because if that scenario had played out, then we'd have presumably had a whole other Dalek universe going on, would have come about from American telly, I suppose. So it wouldn't have quite been the final end. We'd still be watching it in the context of, and then they went and did this other stuff. We didn't get Day of the Daleks and Genesis and things, but
a couple of really minor points. John Bailey playing Waterfield's in the Sensorites, this, and then the Horns of Nymon, and I thought to myself, well, Evil of the Daleks, Horns of Nymon, it's the sublime to the ridiculous. And then a fascinating theory from Simon Guerrier about Max Dibble and Waterfield echoing the relationship between Terry Nation and David Whitaker, and that Nation is sort of looking for gold with the Daleks in America, whilst Whitaker somehow got caught up in something that he's not quite sure about. But anyway, I mean, I think it's a brilliant idea from Simon. Yeah, I hope he doesn't mind that I've picked that up from him and talked about it here. But I do like that.
That's a very engaging idea.
Yeah. I suppose wrapping this one up, final thoughts on Evil of the Daleks?
Oh, my final thought is I loved it. What a great ride. It flowed. It was very watchable. The plot points that we're picking at almost add to rather than detract from the flow of the episode. I would love to get this back on video, obviously, but I think we have enough of it with Telesnaps and the animated series and the retained episode to say, this is a really good, fun episode. I
think my only remaining plot hole that I will These are all coming from love, but the one remaining plot hole that I did feel like the need to. I thought, hang on, did I really hear that correctly? Is in episode 6 when in the cell when Victoria and Camel when the emergency klaxons, when the emergency announcements start to go off, human beings detected in the city. Victoria's immediate thought is maybe it's Jamie and the Doctor. She doesn't mention her father, and she hasn't met the Doctor at this point. I guess Jamie has probably mentioned the Doctor to her,
but he wasn't very happy with him at the time.
Yes, which is a bit odd, but
yeah. So when I think about the two great Trout and Dalek stories, I think I believe that Power of the Daleks, in my head, I believe that is a greater story because it's just so brilliantly plotted and it ramps up the tension with every episode. But in my heart, emotionally, I find that this is the one that appeals the more. And I kind of, it's a bit like when we talked about Pyramids of Mars. I kind of know there's a lot of tosh in there, but at the same time, I still love it.
Well, it is that Victorian sci-fi as well.
Yeah. I'm glad you went before me, Richard, because you basically took the words right out of my mouth. I actually do feel the same way about power versus evil. But certainly now that we've had the opportunity to experience evil in a way we never could before, you're absolutely right. There is a charm about evil that power just doesn't have, with the exception of the very new character of Trout and his mercurial nature at that point. But yeah, that's basically how I feel as well. This story is a little bit too convoluted, but it's charming, it's well cast, it's well acted. There's some gorgeous music in it. Man, if that was a soundtrack that existed, because that's a sad fate too, not to belittle 97 missing episodes, but almost no Simpson soundtracks exist separately. It's a real tragedy because everybody else's basically exists. Tristram Carey's, et cetera, et cetera. Not to keep harping on the music, but I care a lot about it. But anyway, a charming story. And if it thrilled my parents, that has to be a good sign.
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to grab 5 minutes just to sort of, get your thoughts together again, and then we'll go with the other one?
Yes.
Sure, fine by me.
Yeah.
Wouldn't mind just making a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Back in a minute.
Right. Cheers. Yay!
Hey. We go there.
Excellent.
We're hired.
Love it.
I don't think so. I'm sorry if any of my insertions threw you off, but
No.
like,
No, you missed it, Giles, but Jess explained to us that he was going for a sort of Patrick Troughton-esque performance.
Yes.
Approximate.
but American.
But American, yeah.
Yeah.